laying some ground rules down. Number one, this is a conversation. I am not in any way, shape, or form presenting myself as an expert on this topic. I think if you have been in classes that I've taught, what I present myself as is the most enthusiastic student in the class. And or another way that we talk about this is that I'm the bus driver. We're all on the bus and we're all on a field trip today. But ultimately, the truth is the driver of the bus. The truth is the destination that we're trying to get to. So other ground rules is this, that look, we need to be respectful. At some point, you will have the opportunity to ask questions or to state your observations. Do not attack each other, please. Don't demean each other, please. What I want you to do is to be respectful. You can attack the issues. You can attack the information that I have, because the goal is not to make you think like me, but to make you think. I think if we can get everyone thinking this morning and throughout the session, it's going to be great. You're going to learn something. I can promise you that one thing. You will learn at least one thing that in each session that you did not know. And if you've read the materials, what you saw in the outline is that there are links that are associated. If you're looking at the material online, those links are there for the further enhancement of the conversation. You've got to read that additional material. Some of it is historical, some of it is scientific. The part that is scientific, I'm not endorsing everything that is said, the alleged science, but the reason why I am putting that scientific information there is to show you the point at which seemingly the Bible and science intersects. The Bible doesn't agree with science as we understand it, science in every respect, but the Bible doesn't disagree with science. And so in this class, this is not a science class, although we're going to talk about science. This is not a history class, although we are talking about history. We're going to talk about a lot of topics. I'm not an expert in any of them. I'm a student of many topics, and I invite you to travel with us to discuss. So now let's get to the meat of the material. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my outline so that you guys can follow along with me. Hopefully what you see right now is the cover page for the conversation, which is Africa's contribution to the Bible. If you notice, there are different images. In your top left corner, you have a group of African men. These are from the Maasai tribe. You can't see the image? Okay. Okay, hold on one second. I apologize. Let me see. Yeah, give me 1 second. I apologize. I missed one step. All right. How about now? I apologize. Now, let me go back to discussing. Can you see the men in the top left screen? Okay, in the red, those are part of the Maasai tribe. Can you see the whole outline? Because on my screen, there's people boxed onto the right. Can you see the whole material? Yes, we see page 1. Okay, all right, good. All right, so the title of the course, Africa's Contribution to the Bible. That's there. And we go down further to the left, you see an owl. Do you see that? Yes. When you complete this course, you will know exactly what that symbol means. I'll tell you up front that that's Egyptian hieroglyphics, and it spells something out that you want to know. To the right, you will see someone who looks like a pharaoh, and to the left, you'll see someone who looks like a pharaoh. At the bottom, of course, is the Bible. All right. Now, if you've read the material, it gives you the introduction. Now, the introduction is this. I'm going to summarize it because we're not going to spend much time reading. We're going to hopefully spend time discussing. But what the introduction tells you is that when the colonial powers, and that's distinguishing from ancient Europe, when the colonial powers first came to the west coast of Africa, it wasn't the first time that Europeans came into contact with Africans. All right. The first time that the Europeans came into contact with Africans was probably about 400 to 500 BC, before the Common Era, before Christ. What we're going to learn in this study is that actually the Greeks and the Romans held the Egyptians, who are Africans, and we need to talk about that just very quickly, how that historically, when Egypt is discussed, it is excised or removed from the African continent and pushed into the Middle East. And that was done intentionally by the Europeans who came there and found all of the wonder and the splendor and the advanced writing, arts, and medicines. And they said, well, what we want to put forward about Africans doesn't comport with what we see here in Africa. So we've got to find a way to make these people, this civilization, non-African. And we'll get into who did that, some of the famous names, and we'll discuss that. But what you need to know up front is that the original Europeans viewed Africa as a place to go to learn. They admired, they studied the technology, the medicine, the religion, the philosophy, the ideology of the Egyptians. The person who is recognized as the father of history is a Greek person named Herodotus. Herodotus wrote in his chronicles of traveling around the world, and he traveled around the world, and one of the places that he went to is Egypt. And this is that outside learning that if you really want to dive in and get the whole full story, you're going to have to do that. I encourage you to do that, and then bring your questions, your comments, your observations, and even your disagreements, because again, the goal is not for you to synthesize your views with my views, but for you to think about what perhaps previously you've been encouraged not to think about. But let me get back to Herodotus, because he's an interesting person. You can look him up, you can Google him. He is recognized by the Western world as the father of history. And one of his histories he writes about is his travel through Egypt somewhere around 450 BCE. And he describes the Egyptian people, and he describes them as being dark-skinned people with curly hair. You might recognize the description. It wasn't beige-skinned people. It certainly wasn't white-appearing people. It was dark-skinned people. I invite you and encourage you to go in and look at Herodotus' account of who he saw and what he observed in Egypt back around 450 BC. Don't quote me in terms of holding me down to the exact date, but it's hundreds of years before the birth of Christ. So again, my whole point is that, all right, these first Europeans had this idea that they could learn from the Africans, that they could learn from the Egyptians. So then the question then becomes, well, how did we get to the point where now, for the most part, the world, the Western world, referred to Africa as the quote unquote dark continent, referred to Africa as a place that had no appreciable history. And that term dark had double meaning. Dark in the sense that it's unknown and is not even worth knowing. Dark also in the sense that we were ideologically not advanced, that we were religiously in the dark, that we were intellectually in the dark. So how do we get to that point? Well, it's simple. It's dollars and cents. When the Portuguese, which were the first European colonial power that came in on the west coast of Africa, somewhere around what is current day Angola, which was a part of Congo, the Congo Empire, they saw gold, they saw resources that they wanted to take. Initially, it was a friendly relationship. They were trading, but ultimately they decided they were going to actually not only take Africa's resources, but they were going to take Africa's people and begin to trade in human flesh. So we see a decided shift, in the first colonial powers come into the west coast of Africa somewhere in the mid 1400s, maybe early 1400s, and they begin to interact with these African empires. Initially, they're trading partners. Eventually, they begin to try to dominate, and beyond that point, we get to where we are today. So now, to support the notion that they had the right to take the African people and to take the resources of the African people, their philosophy, their ideology, and their religious literature began to develop all kinds of rationalizations or justifications or explanations. And one of the things that we will look at that will be discussed in this course is something called the Hamitic curse. For some of you scholars that are on listening to this, I know you've heard of the Hamitic curse. The Hamitic curse goes back to the idea that when Noah, after the flood, got drunk, and this is in the 9th chapter of the book of Genesis. We may or we may not read it, but I encourage you to read all things that I'm referencing. That Noah at that time had 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Ham was his youngest son. Ham observed him being drunk and laughed at him and went and told his brothers. His brothers didn't look at him, but got a blanket and backed up and covered him. When Noah awakened, he realized what happened. And according to the European literature,
I had to do
and I can hear someone if you, so please, you're talking, please make sure you muted please mute your phone so I can continue. But so Noah at that point pronounced a curse on Ham. That's what the European literature says. That's what the European theology began to say. But actually, if you look at what was said, it wasn't directed toward Ham, number one. It was directed toward Canaan. And that's important. But basically, according to the Europeans in the 14th century going forward, what they said is, because of this, God cursed Black people. Ham in general is all Black people, or Ham is the descendants of, all the descendants of Ham are considered to be the Black people. And so God cursed the Black people in 2 ways. Number one, they will have to serve white people forever, be subservient to white people. And number 2, God gave them dark colored skin as a symbol of their perpetual inferiority. Now, what we're going to do is just look at that both in terms of scripture. We're going to flesh that out. And then we're going to also, after we go to scripture, we're going to go to some scientific sources that we know are reliable in terms of how we get to skin color. And we're going to compare what the Hamitic curse says to what we know in terms of science and what we know in terms of what the scripture actually says. So our goal is not to offend anyone, obviously, but it is not to coddle either. It's to get to the truth. That is what this is about. So let me go back. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because this is Black History Month. And when we think about Black history, if we're not careful, we think in terms of the last 400 years. We think narrowly in terms of our 400-year experience of being slaves and then trying to work to our point of freedom after slavery. And if we do that, what this course suggests is that that's too narrow of a scope. When we get deep into this conversation, what we're going to see is that there is thousands of years of recorded Black history. Thousands, as in 4,000 plus. So if we only limit ourselves to the last 400 years, which 400 years are largely shaped and defined by what the Europeans told us about ourselves and wants us to think about ourselves, that we are cursed, that we're the descendants of cursed people, that this dark skin that we are in is undesirable, then we're selling ourselves short. So if we want to know history, Black history, then we need to go all the way back to the beginning. So that's why we're going all the way back to, if you can follow along, to the Garden of Eden. So the first question that we want to ask ourselves is, well, where is Eden? And that's important because wherever Eden was on planet Earth, and it wasn't on Mars, it wasn't on the moon, it was on planet Earth, then the Bible, if we're believing the biblical record, the Bible tells us that that is where humanity began. So if you look below, my next question is, well, what color was Adam and Eve? And for those of you who are thinkers like myself, you may be wondering, well, why is it important? Why does it matter what color Eve and Adam and Eve is? Let me give you some, on that question, let me pause and give you some pictures that I found. Can y'all see that picture? Yes. This is a picture that I pulled from a Bible. Okay. And if my eyes are deceiving me, maybe they are, but what that appears to be is a white person. Would you agree, class? Yes. Okay, so let me go on then. Let me get out of that picture and let me bring up another picture that I pulled up. You see this picture? Who is that? Who is that purported to be? Jesus, right? Let me get out of that picture and come to another picture. Can you see that picture? Who is that supposed to be?
Supposed to be Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve. So what do you see a common theme here?
Yeah. Yep.
And what is that common theme?
That they're white.
So that everything, and this is consistent, and I could just go through page after page. I think you get the message that everything in the beginning and everything in the Bible is white. So what we have then is there are explicit messages and implicit messages. The implicit message is that it all started with white people, right? And that everything that is good and great is white. Now that's the implicit message. You can't get away from that. Now, let me just further discuss this because people may be saying, well, what's the import of history? Well, the import of history is this. Have you ever gone to a doctor for the first time? And you've never been to this doctor before? Before, if he's a good doctor or if she's a good doctor, before they put one hand on you, what are they going to do when you're sitting in the lobby?
Have you fill out a questionnaire?
And a substantial part of that questionnaire is going to deal with what?
Your family history.
Your family history. Why? Because there's predictive, there's revelatory value. There's the doctor gets a full understanding of who you are and what your potential is and what your risk factors are. So when we talk about why is it important to know our history, I'm telling you that that's the reason. But there's another reason. If that is not persuasive or prevailing to you, let me offer it this way from a spiritual perspective. Is it important to know the truth?
Yes.
Right? You know, the Bible speaks about that. In fact, I think it was Jesus in the book of John, right? Chapter 8. He said something about truth. He said, you shall know the truth and
the truth shall make you free.
So then let's put that in some type of formulaic statement. There is a direct relationship between the amount of truth you have and the amount of what?
Freedom.
Freedom. Do you see that? Now let's make that an inverse statement. Let's state it in the negative. If you have little truth, you have little what?
Freedom.
You see? So when we think in terms of Black people being enslaved for 400 years, the slavery wasn't just the chains, it was them putting ideas in our head about who we are and who they are. Do you understand that? Mm-hmm. That's powerful. Because I would suggest to you, I would submit to you humbly, and you don't have to agree with me, that the chains are still on our mind. Mm-hmm. Have you ever called someone Black and ugly together as an insult? Who told you that Black was ugly?
Right.
Who told you that you need to straighten your hair? Who told you that your nose was too wide? Who told you that your lips were too big? Who told you that you needed to slim your body down to a rail? That your hips were too wide? That your thighs were too thick? Who told you that? Not the Bible. But if you have notions explicitly or implicitly in your mind that the European image and form is the desired image and form, and that Black is the most undesirable form, then the chains are still on in your mind. I remember in the 90s, there was a man who was trying to date my mother, you know, after my parents separated. And there's this man who came up, he wrote my mother a poem. He said, if you're white, you're right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. But if you're Black, get back. Now that would be funny if it wasn't so profoundly sad and so profoundly true in terms of how society runs, right? There is something that I refer to as skin equity. The lighter your skin, the more equity, the more favor, the more default presumptions are made that you are good. The darker your skin, what? There are negative presumptions and assumptions that attach to you. When I, as a lawyer, walk into the courtroom, people are assuming some things about me, and generally speaking, it's not good. That I'm unprepared, that I don't know the law, that I can't speak well, that I'm not saying ask, but I'm axing people. I can't say street, but I'm saying screet. There are some default negative assumptions that are associated with people who look like me, and it's not by accident. All right, so that's why it matters. We need to know the truth. Whatever the truth is, wherever the truth leads us, we need to know. The truth always matters. That's the point. Now, let's get back to this map here. I don't know what the origins of this map is, but what it is long ago, when people were trying to figure out where Eden is, clearly people were thinking at some point that Eden might have been in Africa. This is the old spelling of the word Africa. Do you see the name Ham? Okay, we're gonna discuss Ham, and it's not like a pig, but as in the son of the third son of Noah. We're gonna discuss that name extensively throughout this session, but I just only offer this to show you this. Now then, where is the Garden of Eden? We're in this first session. What we're trying to do is establish, where did it all begin? You know, initially we're talking about where is the beginning of Black history, but what we will discover is that the beginning of Black history actually turns out to be the beginning of human history. And if you will wait with me a little bit, I'll tell you. So now the Bible doesn't tell us where Eden is. And I think that is by design, right? Because people will still be trying to go find a tree and partake of the free fruit and live forever. But the Bible does give us geographical clues, which are amazing. What are the geographical clues that the Bible gives us? One clue is, it talks about that there was a river that flowed through Eden. And then when it got outside of Eden, it divided into 4 rivers, and it described those rivers. So let's go to this first one, which is Genesis 2:11. Can y'all see the scripture?
Mm-hmm.
Now, by the way, just for your reference, for you Bible scholars, Brother Paul, Minister Brown, Minister Jenkins, Pastor Fillmore, Minister Fillmore, this is Strong's Concordance. All right. It is a credible source for Christians. And it's basically Genesis. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden. And from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. The name of the first was Pison, that which is compasseth the whole land of Havilah. And there was gold. And the gold of the land is good. And there is bdellium and onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is that compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. Let's stop, full stop. How far do you have to read in the Bible before the continent of Africa is referenced? First book, second chapter. How far do you have to read into the Bible before the continent of Europe is referenced?
Ooh.
Anyone want to take a guess at that?
New Testament.
New Testament. You got it. When Paul begins to talk about his missionary journeys, okay? That's when Europe is first referenced. And the point of this is that if it's mentioned very early on in the Bible, then that means it is significant. Now, what is also very significant is that it tells me that the Garden of Eden, whether it is actually in Africa or not, is not the point that I'm trying to make, but that it's actually in close reference or somewhere or proximity to, because the Bible makes that specific reference. And if you read on, because I'm looking at the time and I see that we have 2 comments, and I want to come to those comments in just a moment, or questions, I don't know what they are. If you read on, you'll see that the first place that is Havilah is actually a region in Northeast Africa that is commonly known as currently between what is Sudan and Ethiopia. Now, I can tell you, if you're going to do the due diligence and do the research, which I have done, experts don't agree on where Havilah is. Some people say that it's actually in Saudi Arabia. Some people say that it's all the way up in India. But there's an argument to be made that it's in Ethiopia and or Sudan, because it's one of the references that is made clearly is that one of the rivers go right through Africa. Okay, now I should tell you this also because it's important. Generally speaking, when the Bible references Ethiopia, it's not talking about the country that we know today as Ethiopia, but it is a generalized reference to what we think of today as sub-Saharan Africa. Now, let me take a moment and go to the question or comments. Okay, Lynn Kelly says that this is informative and interesting. Thank you for doing this. You bet, my sister. Stay tuned. And Brooke says, good morning, Lynn. Thanks. Okay, all right. We'll keep on moving. All right, I'm trying to cover a lot of ground here because it's just chocked with information. But so I'm showing you that there is simply, here again, Pastor Girley does not offer anything dogmatically. Remember, the goal is to make you think. We have read these scriptures many, many, many times, but we've never gone back and looked at what they mean to us today. And we take our lack of due diligence and we add to it the pictures that I showed you earlier about who we've seen as being biblical characters. One of the other persons that I wanted to show you was this. Can y'all see that? So everybody that on earth that was good is white, and everybody that is in heaven, this is an angel, is white. And the question is then where do we fit in? Well, the answer that I've just shown you is we fit in the first book, second chapter. And our history proceeds, our history and our involvement and our contribution, Africa's contribution to the Bible proceeds from Eden. It's connected. Africa is connected to Eden. And that is where the first people lived. So that's one point of information. Now, the other point of information is this. This is the Apostle Paul speaking in the book of Acts. And he's talking about God, and he says, and have made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. So Paul is agreeing with Genesis, which is that all human beings came from one set of individuals, the first couple, Adam and Eve. And that's the whole point of that passage. I want to get back to now. So what we're going to do, we start out looking at the Bible because this is about Africa's contribution to the Bible. Now, then secondly, in every instance, what we're going to do is say, well, is there any kind of sources outside of the Bible that seem to confirm, or at least to some degree? Now, again, I want to say to you, because when we get to what scientists say about how old the earth is, I'm not in agreement with that. What I'm in agreement with is the part where they're in agreement with scripture. And there is some agreement there. And I want to show you where it is. And so this brings us to point A. The two basic facts that the Bible and modern science agree upon is that all of humanity began in one location and spread over time. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
B, the Genesis account states that the two rivers, Pison and Gihon, we just went through that. And all that is, Minister Brown and Minister Fillmore, Minister Jenkins, is to suggest that there's a possibility if Eden wasn't in Africa, it was nearby Africa. Okay, now let's continue on to the science. Let's talk about genetics now. Part of this course is genetics. I'm not a genetic scientist. Here's a disclaimer. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not an archaeologist, but I've looked at some of this science to see if there's some support to the notion that all human beings come from one single source. And the center of our cells, our human cells, is what is called the mitochondria. If you've taken a biology class, you know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of our cells. We get our mitochondria DNA from our mother, men and women. So you can know someone's like 23andMe, right? Or Ancestry.com, when they're tracing your genealogy, what they're looking at on the female side is what is called the mitochondria. With the mitochondria, you can know your mothers, all the way back, theoretically, ostensibly to Eve. So there's this remarkable finding, and I can't tell you exactly when it occurred. Scientists found the skull of a woman in a cave, and you can correct me on this, and I'm inviting you to do the research. They refer to this woman as Mitochondria Eve, not because she's the Eve of the Bible, but because she's what I call the Merkah. What is the Merkah? The most recent common ancestor. What does that mean? The Merkah is someone that we can point back to. Everybody on planet Earth is connected. Everybody shares the same genetic makeup, or shares genetic information with this woman. So she is the oldest person that scientists have been able to locate that all of us are somehow related to. That's one way of looking at it. I'm sure I'm not doing a good job. But why don't we just click on the site? Because that's really what this class is about. You see the Mitochondria Eve there? Okay, so I'm going to take you down to, here's her actual skull. Can you see the skull?
Yes.
And they extracted DNA from that. And furthermore, I should tell you that over the last 20 years, scientists have been taking DNA from people all around the world and doing what is called genetic mapping to see where the earliest DNA, the source of the earliest DNA on planet Earth came from. So with that data, they looked at Mitochondria Eve here, who she's beautiful, you would agree, right? And they determined that every living human being on Earth today is connected to this beautiful woman here. All right, and here's this down here is just a genetic mapping, but I want to show you this. That's her picture. What do you think? Looks like someone you know, right?
Yeah.
Someone you've seen. I'm just going out on a limb. She don't look like she's Chinese, does she?
No.
She don't look like she's Native American. She don't look like she's white. She looks like somebody I know in my family.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's the point. Now I'm going to show you an animation here. And I'm going to set it up and tell you that there are many different genetic studies that have been done but they all agree generally that this is where humanity started and how it spread out across planet Earth. Okay, so stay with me, guys. This is class where now the teacher's going to put a film on. It's going to be a short film. Here we go. Can y'all see it? By the National Geographic, guys. So let's get back to mitochondria, Eve. One second, let me get the right link up. I want to direct you to this point. So what's the point of it all? Okay, what's the point of it all? Can you see the little writing right to the side of Sister Eve?
Yes.
It says, again, biblical scholars, this is not meant to be the biblical Eve. This is scientists saying this is the most recent, ancient human being that we can identify genetically that everybody's related to. That's the point of that. These findings also tear apart any argument for racism and discrimination. That's why we're doing this, right? Showing us exactly how connected we are. That's consistent with the Bible, right?
Yes.
That's consistent with what the Apostle Paul said. That's consistent with the Genesis account. We are connected. Not only are we all cousins, but we are all what? Here's the news flash. We are all Africans. All of us. Now, let me tell you a story. I grew up in Long Beach, California. You know, my name was Jado. I'm from the West Side. You know what I'm saying? But my family, my mother and father grew up in rural Pine Bluff, Arkansas, picking cotton 10 hours a day for $3 a day. They were country when country wasn't cool. And they had one goal. They had one overarching goal when they were growing up, to get out of the South, to escape. My father says that Pine Bluff is a good place to be from, as in he escaped from there. And not only did my father hold that position and that perspective, many Black people did. From 1900 to as late as the 1970s, all the way perhaps to 1999, there was a out migration from the South of African Americans. They refer to this as the Great Migration. Okay, you can look it up. I encourage you to do that. Black people were trying to get to a place where they could be free from what? Racial oppression, where they could be free from being lynched in the middle of the night, right? Where they would have economic opportunities, where they could stand on their own merits, whether they were good, bad, or indifferent. So they saw in New York City, where there are 4 million Black people. Did you know that in and around the city of New York, there are 4 million Black people? But Black people don't have much proportionate power in New York. Did you know that? There are no Black senators in New York. Never been a Black governor in New York, never will be. I want to juxtapose that the 4 million Black people to the less than 1 million white or European people who live in Wyoming. You know that this maybe just 1 million? They have 2 US senators, and that's real power, and they have governors and they have congressmen. We moved. I understand why we moved. We were escaping. My family escaped from the South. However, I promise I'm going somewhere with this. My family, when they came from the South, and other people, when people came from the South, they would look down their nose at the people who just came from the South. They refer to them as being country bumpkins. Y'all heard that before, right? And if in words of my brother Nate, who's listening in, brother Nate likes to say, if quiet is kept, we may have referred to some people ourselves as country bumpkins, right? He country. If you call someone country, what are you saying? Are you trying to give them a compliment?
No.
You're trying to say they're ignorant, right?
Yeah.
They're unrefined, even though they come from the same place you came from. Even though your grandparents and great-grandparents was buried in the same soil as theirs. In other words, even though your roots are there, you're looking down your nose at these people who are there because you left at an earlier stage. You see that what I'm saying? So now then, if we go back to the observation that all of us are Africans, what we're dealing with is this Arkansas thing that I'm sharing with you on a global scale. Do you see my point?
Yeah.
If we are all Africans, genetically speaking, but some left before us, then that doesn't make one group of people better than the other group of people. But that's what's going on. That's if you could put racism in that context, it's driven by ignorance. I was talking to a white female who is very, I don't know, what's the word? Very comfortable in her white European skin. And I have no issue with that at all. And suspicious of Black people. And I told her, you're an African. And she looked at me like, you're crazy. And then I had the audacity to show her what I just showed you. Mitochondria Eve. And she was dutiful. And she was on her little tablet, cross-referencing it and looking it up and checking it out. And she couldn't find anything with it. She was shook for the rest of the evening. Deal with it. You're Black. We are all Africans. And a beautiful way that I heard this told, and again, this is not about diminishing, this is about talking about how we are the same people, which is what we must learn in terms of understanding history, human history, Black history. It's the point that you should see is that human history begins in Africa. That's the point that I'm going to go ahead and make. You don't have to agree with me. I'm going to give you one more source, secular source. And then once we hit this secular source, then we're going to be through in terms of the substance of it. But you can ask questions, we can discuss it, we can come back into the big square, you can raise your hand, you can say, I totally disagree with you, Pastor Girl. And I'm not going to get upset about it. But here's the rules, here's the ground rules in terms of when you talk about your views. You can tell me 3 things. You can say, I don't believe in the source, or I have another source, or I have no source, but this is just how I feel. And if you on the just how I feel, don't be upset if everyone don't agree with you. Because what I'm trying to do is get you to think about what you're thinking about and what's the source, or lawyers like to say, what's the authority? What's the basis for your thought process? This is a learning experience. Let's go back to the outline because there's one more piece there. So if you, now guys, I've given you this, if you got the outline, you have the ability to go and click on these links and read them all the way out. It's very interesting reading. But I'm showing you now what you saw in the animation. Can you see that? No. Okay, let me get back. I apologize. Let me get back to sharing with you. I apologize for that. I'm gonna, see, I've got to be the chief technologist as well as the instructor today. Can you see it now?
Yes.
We saw it played out, right? But what's significant here is this. We're all Africans. If we want to be more specific, we're all East Africans. That's what science tells us. How that is, how it is, what that means is that everybody on planet Earth today is linked to East Africa. And then they migrated out from there, okay? And the arrows just show the different directions that they went out of Africa. But the first place out of Africa that Black people went is into what is currently known as Saudi Arabia. And that kind of holds true to me. I'll tell you why it holds true to me, because I did the Ancestry DNA, Africa DNA, and in the database, it asks you, do you want to see who is related to you around the world? You know, me, I'm like, yeah. Now, I wouldn't do it anymore because I see that the police are using it to arrest a bunch of Negroes. You know, I was stupid, but at the moment I was eager. Yeah, I want to know who I relate to all around the world. Well, besides people in North Carolina and some people in Mississippi, there were at least, I want to say 50 people that I shared DNA with right here. Can you see where my arrow is moving? You know where that is?
Mm-hmm.
Saudi Arabia. Well, that makes sense, right? That kind of, it didn't make sense to me before, but when I went back and did the science and the research, I see that, again, if we all are Black, now then the last thing is, well, if we were all Black, how did we become what we are today? All right, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that question. Let me see if I can find the next thing here. What scientists tells us, and the scientists today are trying to narrow this down. This is an article from October 29th, 2019. And they've pretty much said it's Botswana. I don't know that I agree with that. Again, the point of that is not that you have to agree with the specific location, but when the scientists are backing up genetically, the same science that they use to determine whether or not you're Black, whether or not you have sickle cell anemia, whether or not you are at risk for cancer, the same science, when they take that science and apply it to genealogy, it leads them back, multiple sources, it leads them back to East Africa. Oh, maybe you've heard the story of Ruby Bridges. She was a young Black female. She was not like the Little Rock Nine who integrated Central High. She was one elementary age Black female who came to integrate a school, I believe, in Louisiana. And the adults were so mean to her. They were spitting at her, yelling at her. She had to be escorted in to her class by, I think, Highway Patrol, the troopers, the state troopers. Well, she's an adult today, and she's an author, and she travels around the world today talking about why it's important for Black people and white people and all people to get along. And her point of her lectures is that we are all related, we're all connected. And she was giving a lecture recently, like in the last 2 years, to an elementary school class. And she was trying to explain this complex concept that we're now discussing in our Black History session today. And one 6-year-old girl raised her hand, and Miss Ruby said, yes. She said, I get it. We're kind of like M&Ms. And Ruby said, what do you mean? She said, we're different colors on the outside, but we're all the same on the inside. And that's powerful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because a child shall lead us.
Right.
We make it so difficult, but we all are M&Ms. And I will modify that 6-year-old statement and say, not only are we all the same, but we are all chocolate on the inside. Now, I know we're red on the inside. I know we're, but in terms of our DNA, our genetic makeup, the origins of it is African. Let me go to this comment or question in the chat. There's a comment. It says, when we speak of the continent of Africa, is there any distinct difference between North Africa and Sub-Africa? And why would the Europeans to this day make the difference between? Well, the question is there a difference? Well, Europeans and Brother Nathan Carrington, we're going to get to that in session 2. There is no genetic difference, but there was a deliberate attempt to separate Egypt in particular from the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. I don't want to get ahead of my skis, but I will tell you that one of the things that we're going to learn as we go forward into the study is that about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, what we know today as the Sahara Desert was actually a tropical oasis. And so you had people that had left the east coast of Africa, that were up there living, farming, building houses, farming animals, and we know this because in the middle of the Saharan Desert, they found rock art of African looking people in the caves. And if you want to research this, and I hope that I'm just whetting your appetite, guys. I hope you're a nerd like me and you're going to go ahead and do a deep dive after you get off this conversation with the instructor, and you're going to actually do the work. I'm simply trying to challenge you and stimulate your thinking. But they found rock art that showed African people, distinctly are African people, in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So through that, they know that because of changing weather patterns, that there were rivers in the middle of the desert that dried up. And we know that water is the main source of life. It is the locus of life. If you don't have drinkable water, you can't live, so you have to move. And as the desert dried up, some of the people migrated to the west coast of Africa and formed some of the nations, Mali, that we know, Sanjay, some of those empires, Nigeria that we know today. But some of them, a lot of them, a considerable amount of them moved to the east into what is called the Nile Valley. All right. But the reality is, Brother Nate, to your point, everybody started in the East Coast. And so there is no appreciable genetic difference between the people. There are nuances because as you take a gene and you copy it, over time you have changes, which are the genetic scientists refer to as mutations. And we'll get into that hopefully in just a moment. But to answer your question, why do Europeans try to separate Egypt from the rest of Africa? Because it is so spectacular in its accomplishments, in terms of its philosophy, in terms of its architecture, in terms of its writing, in terms of its literature. In every respect, it defies the images of being of what Europe, and I mean narrow it because it wasn't the Greeks, remember? They admired the Africans. It wasn't the Romans even, it was the colonial powers who wanted to justify and rationalize and reconcile their Christian beliefs with subjugation of their fellow human beings. So based upon their greed, they concocted an elaborate theoretical, anthropological, and theological scheme, which we intend to unpack in this conversation. Now, let me get to this. There's another comment, and bear with me, guys, because I am not tech. So it says, if we're all from Africa, then how did we get the different colors? Well, Brooke, that's my last point that I'm going to make today, is how we became different colors. Okay. All right. Let's go back to our outline. Here it is right here. Can y'all see that? Because that goes right to Brooke's question, right? Why did darker and lighter skinned human beings evolve? Now, for time's sake, I'm going to summarize it, but guys, I gave you the outline with the link so that you could read it. But let me summarize it. Dark skin is caused by what is called melanin. Melanin is something that is produced in the skin for the sake of protecting us from the sun. All right. Now, if the first human beings were born in Africa near the equator, well, that's where the most sun is, right?
Mhm.
And so they needed the most protection from the sun. But as they began to migrate in the way that you saw the animation, what? Less sun, what? They needed less protection. So we are fearfully and wonderfully made. The body adjusts. You may have some cousins. You may have some cousins who live in Michigan, who live in New York, who are a living testament to this. They went up there and they got light-skinned. And I know that's not a word, but it happens, right? It happens. Your body's making the adjustment. So, this, and I wanted to end there because we're going right to the heart of this notion that black skin is a curse. It is not. It is the opposite of a curse, because if you don't have enough melanin, if you don't have enough skin protection, or what happens if you're out there in that sun?
You can get skin cancer.
Skin cancer, that's the #1 risk. Now, we need to have some exposure to the sun, right? Because the sun gives us vitamin D, and vitamin D helps us in 2 ways. It makes our bones strong, right? And it actually affects our thinking. If you are in a place where there's not a lot of sun, you lock yourself in a dark room too long, you start going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So what happens as man begins to move away from the equator, his skin begins to lighten up. But not only that, and you read the article that I have up, and I'm summarizing it for time's sake. Not only was our dark skin protection from the sun, but our curly hair, what we call nappy hair, was also a helmet for us to protect us from the sun. And when it rained, to hold the moisture on our scalp to continue to cool us. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you are trying to put a perm in your hair. And you're putting Ambi on your skin because you're too black. Who told you were too black? So, Hamitic curse that cause our skin to be black, it just doesn't comport. It doesn't remotely line up with science. This black skin, when I was reading this, because people, and I'm talking to black people now. How many times have you heard people say, don't stay in the sun too long, you're gonna get black. Like the sun is gonna cook you. No, if you're getting dark because you're in the sun, there is some exterior aspect to that. That's true. But mostly you have to consider that it's your body saying, look, I need more protection. And now let's talk about this further, because you read the article, you got to read the article, read the links. What science also tells us is that the reason why white people have longer noses, generally speaking, as opposed to ours being broad. It's because as they went to colder climates, the air was cold. And if they breathed it in directly with the big broad nostrils, it would freeze. The cold air would get in and damage their lungs. So the longer nose became a filter to filter the air to warm it up as it's traveling to your lungs. But you want to have a narrow nose. You don't understand that God in everything is, if Travis Green was in this class, he would raise his hand and he would say, Pastor Girley, God is intentional. He's intentional. We're talking about Black history. We're talking about Africa in the Bible. I'm laying it out. And what I'm telling you and I'm showing you is that Africa is first book, second chapter, and they're further, it goes from there all the way to the New Testament. Okay? So don't look at your Black skin and think of it as a badge of inferiority. And in our community, we've had issues, and if quiet is kept, Brother Nate, we still have issues with that. You know, if a woman's hair is short and curly, she might be out of gas. If it's long and straight, which is what like the white people or the European people, then we whether we do it explicitly or consciously or not, we see that as something that's desirable. I gotta get to one more thing, guys. One more thing. Mendel's, do you see this? Okay, I'm gonna try to explain this, but I encourage you to really go in and look at Mendel's. So Mendel is named after an Austrian monk he was a Christian priest who Gregor Mendel was his name. He was breeding peas, right? But Gregor Mendel is recognized as the father of genetic science, okay? So Gregor was like, well, if I take a green pea and I breed it with a yellow pea, what will the pea look like? Can you see? That's what that chart shows. Well, what he discovered is if you take a purely green pea and you breed it with a yellow pea, which is a lighter colored pea, green is going to dominate. Now, every single time when he did this, a pure green and a pure yellow, it came out, the color is green on the outside. Now, I'm going to give you some genetic terms and you can research it later. There's genotype and phenotype. Okay, write that down. Genotype and phenotype. Well, genotype means if I could put an X-ray on your body and look at what's in there genetically, I would see green and yellow. That's called the genotype. Phenotype means what I look like. If you take a green and a yellow and mix it, phenotypically it's going to come out green, but it's still genotypically yellow and green. Did I lose you? It's just that the yellow is covered or hidden, and therefore they refer to that as the recessive trait. And the green is the dominant trait. And what you need to understand is that the darker color is the dominant color. That's genetic. We're not talking race. You need to understand that. So that goes back to this debunking this concept that Black skin or dark color is somehow a curse. It's not. It's not weak. It's actually strong. Now, let's go on to this one right here. So now, remember I told you if you take a yellow and a green and you mix it, it still comes out green. So this right here says, this is the second generation. In other words, these had a parent, each of these had a parent that was yellow and green, okay? Even though they look green on the outside, or for purposes of this conversation, black and white. They look black on the outside, or they look, let's do it this way, inside the Black community, two dark-skinned parents, all right? Let's substitute it. two dark-skinned parents who both in the past had light-skinned parents, granny. And some people in my family, right? Light-skinned, all right? But on the outside, you got two dark people. If they have children, 3 of the 4 of them are going to be dark, but then 1 might be light-skinned. How can 2 dark-skinned people have a light-skinned child? Because genotypically, there's light skin in their bloodline. Even though phenotypically, which is how I look dark. So daddies, don't be running out there paying extra money to get a DNA test and saying that ain't my baby. Because genotypically, we don't know the whole story. So finishing up in terms of how people change, 2 reasons how skin color changes. As we migrate away from hot climates, we get lighter. Genotypically speaking, if other stuff is in our background, or if you take 2 greens over time and you breed them, you're going to get some variation. That variation scientifically is referred to as mutation. Okay. Now, there's a lot of comments. I've covered a lot of ground, and we've got so much more to cover. It really will be helpful if you get the syllabus, read it online, click on the links, prepare some questions. I am through with my lecture portion. Let me see if I can answer some of these questions or respond to some of these comments. All right. We got one from Sister Brown. She just says, thank you so much. Thank you for being part of this class. Brooke says, genotype. Do y'all understand what I mean when I say genotype? Okay, genotype. Brooke was spelling out, and she was spelling and phenotype. All right. Now, to give you an idea of further understand this recessive and dominant gene concept, I'm talking to Black people. So you probably all have heard of this disease called sickle cell anemia. It is caused by a mutation of the gene that tells us how our blood cells should appear, the size. You know, a sickle cell is normally our cells are oval shaped, but a sickle cell is literally that, like a moon, shaped like a half moon. Now, we get 23 genes from our mother, and we get 23 from our father. That's why you have 23 in me, right? We have a total of 46. As long as you are getting a good gene or a dominant gene that says oval, it doesn't matter if there is a bad gene out there in your line that says sickle. But when you get 2 bad genes, which are referred to as recessive genes, then you get it's not a guarantee that you get it, but there's a possibility that you can get it. And if you want to know that, if you care, and maybe you don't care, you would need to look up Gregor Mendel, and you need to look up what is called a Punnett square, P-U-N-E-T-T, and he lays it out scientifically, if there are any nerds that are paying attention. But that's the whole thing. We have no idea who we are really. We only see our phenotypical form, what we look like. But what we are on the inside, we're all M&Ms. And we are M&Ms with different messages in our genes that we pass on to our descendants. And our ancestors passed on their genes to me. For example, this forehead that I have, this big forehead that I have, it comes from my father. And it comes from his father. Phenotypically and genotypically, I got a big forehead. In my neighborhood, for those of you that are older, you remember Gumby, the animation, the claymation cartoon characters, Gumby and Pokey. There was a group of characters called the Blockhead Brothers. In my neighborhood, that's how they referred to us. Phenotypically, we were blockheads. And I think maybe sometimes if you talk to my wife, she would say I'm still a blockhead. But that's it. as far as session 1 in terms of my lecture piece. If you have questions, I'm just going to plug my laptop in because if you have questions or comments, Sister Libby has a question. I don't see the question. Yeah, Sister Libby's, Minister Olivia Brown's question is that the recessive gene may not show up for quite some time. You're right. And, let's get back to just something that we can all relate to, which is sickle cell anemia. For example, my youngest brother, David Jr., has the trait, the recessive trait, and his children will be fine unless he marries a woman also who has the trait. Then you get into some deep mathematical formulations, which increase the likelihood that the children doesn't mean that the children will have it. Because I know some friends who have 2 children that have sickle cell, but I think the son doesn't. So it increases the likelihood, but yeah, it could hide, and it emerges when 2 people who have got that recessive trait, they don't have the disease. Why? Because they hooked up with someone who doesn't have the trait. The dominant trait means it will be expressed, means if it's, first of all, sickle cell anemia is a recessive trait. Did you know also, by the way, guys, and I'm not trying to be racist, but I'm trying to be informative. Go and do the science. Don't. I always tell people, don't give Pastor Girley carte blanche. I don't even give myself carte blanche. I go back and I listen to my sermons, and sometimes when my wife sees me listening to my sermons, she's like, "Boy, what are you doing?" I'm not trying to do it to be impressive. I'm trying to impress myself. I'm doing it to see if I was speaking truth that day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what I do every single time. I write out my sermons and I go back and I read some of the stuff that I wrote. I'm like to myself, how did you get to that? We should all be asking questions. You know what? God is not intimidated with our questions. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So if you're on a quest to know the truth, God's happy with that because it will lead right to his doorstep. He is the truth. So, so these are all things that I'm offering today. Now let's do a quick preview of what we're going to be doing next week. We're going to talk about what I refer to in the outline as the second Genesis. Noah after the flood and his 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. Please read ahead. Please bring some questions, because that gives this conversation full body. Remember what I said. I'm not offering anything dogmatically, which means I don't think you have to agree with me, but I do think that you have to think about what you haven't been thinking about. I'm not trying to do triple talk. I'm saying there's been some ideas put in our head about ourselves and about other people that aren't true. And we have to unpack those bad ideas. And we have to search for truth. Okay. All right. What else did I want to share with you? I think, well, yeah, I'm doing the preview. So here's a teaser. Ham, H-A-M, the 3rd son of Noah, is going to feature and figure largely in the rest of our conversation. I'm going to tell you this piece of information, and I'm going to challenge you between now and next Sunday to find out and to prove me wrong or right, that when you go into the Bible and you look up the word Ham, it is actually rendered Cam, K-A-M or C-H-A-M. And if you guys that have the concordance, Strong's, Pastor Fillmore, Minister Fillmore, Minister Brown's, plural, Minister Jenkins, look in Strong's and you're going to see that it is actually, Cam is a reference to Egypt. In other words, the Egyptians that we call the Egyptians did not refer to themselves as Egyptians. In fact, that name comes to them by way of the Greeks, who referred to Egypt as Aegyptus, which is Aegyptus. The Egyptians the Greeks referred to Egypt as Aegyptus. And then the Romans came in and they knocked the A off and they knocked the US and they just called it Egypt. But the people themselves that we refer to in the Bible as Egypt call themselves Camites, right? Cam is recognized by all credible theologians as being the father of Black people. And we'll talk about it on the other side. Now, I'm going to come back out of all of this and I'm going to go to this. I stop sharing. That's right. All right. We're back in this session. Are there any questions or comments? Because I am at the end of my presentation for today.
You said that you don't necessarily agree with the age of the Earth,
Right.
that scientists give the age.
Right.
Is there a particular reason?
Yes, there's a reason. Let me repeat. How much that music? Please mute the music. I think it's Sister Florence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. So the question is a good question. Why don't Pastor Girley agree with the age of the Earth that is referenced by the scientists? Because it's a theory, okay? And I can choose to accept or reject a theory. Scientists are not in agreement themselves about the age of the Earth, okay? But let me go to the other side of the house and say that neither are theologians in agreement about what the age of the Earth is. And let me say this further, guys, because, you know, if you attend my classes, you know, I'm just going to shoot straight and be provocative. It is not beyond me to say I don't know. There's some things I don't know, and there's some things that you don't know. There's things that the Bible doesn't say. We got to talk about what the Bible is from my point of view. It's not a book about everything you wanted to ask God, but was afraid to ask him. It's a book about everything God thinks that you need to know. So if theologians are being honest, there's no precise age of the Earth that is given in the Bible. Now, how theologians have tried to come to it in the past, Reverend Brown, is that they've taken the age of Adam, how long he lived, how long his son lived, son, all the way to Jesus, right? And that's the chronology that's played out in Genesis, in the Table of Nations is played out again, I believe, in Matthew, it's played out in Chronicles. But even in that process, theologians don't agree for a couple of reasons. Number one, what is a day and what is a year? The quantum that we use to determine what a day and a year is today, was it the same in the Bible? Another term, and I did some reading on this because it's a good question, and it's a question that came to my mind as well, Reverend Brown. When the Bible talks about Joe being the son of Jack, right? And let me give you an example. The blind man refers to Jesus as the son of David. He is the son of David, right?
Yes. In that he's a descendant.
Is he the direct son of David?
No.
No. The direct son of David is Solomon. So
right.
Literally, my son Brian, who may or may still be on, is the son of David. My father's name is David.
Right.
He's the son of David, but he's not the direct son of David. So when the credible and what's the word, very learned theologian know more than the Bible than I do. See, keep in mind that Pastor Girley is not presenting himself as an expert on any topic, just a student. But those who've studied this more than me have said that there are lapses in the genealogy. And at some point when they're talking about Jack being the son of Jim, that they're speaking about it in the same sense that Brian is the son of David Girley Sr.
Correct.
Okay, so here's my whole point. I don't know enough to agree or to disagree, but whether the earth is 1,000,000 years old or 10,000 years old, people refer to this as the young earth and the new earth theory. But the point is, if it's a theory, it cannot be authoritative. So I'm not going to tell people you got to accept my idea, my construct of how old the earth is, because that's not really primary here. What is primary in my thinking is that God created the heavens and the earth,
Yes.
and that all living human beings come from one source of parents. And science and the Bible seem to be in agreement on that point. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that's all I have to say about it. Beyond that, I'm punching above my weight. I'm in the deep waters, and there's some stuff that I need to learn. But I don't want to go too far down a side road when my whole point is simply this: that there seems to be some synthesis between science and theology, that we are all the descendants of one parent, that we are all M&Ms.
And the reason why I was asking the question, I don't think science is always against our scriptural references. Example, how old was Adam on the very first day he was created?
That's a very good question.
You get two answers and they would both be true. One could say he's 1 day old. The other one could say he was a 25-year-old man. So in the same way that Adam was created in full maturity, I believe the earth could have been 1 day old and yet millions of years old, because God created it as a mature planet for mankind. If you follow what I'm saying.
I follow you, man. I follow you, bro. And that's
So I don't think necessarily the stuff that we say as science is always against scripture, especially even when it comes to the age of the earth. The earth could be that many millions of years old, but when God created it, he created it a mature earth. So there's two answers. Yes, it's 1,000,000 years old. Yes, it's 10,000 years old.
Yeah. Wow, Brother Paul, Minister Brown, I agree with you 100%. And we will discuss that further. There's a question that is, so thank you for your thoughts. I hope everyone followed him. I think it's a good way to approach this. And the idea is, that's on my list of things that I'm going to ask God when I see him, because right now we know in part, right? We understand in part. But then, when is it then? When we see him, when we're transformed, when we're in his presence, then our understanding will be full. Let me read Sister Jillian's question, because I think it's an interesting one. I'm interested in yours and others' thoughts in future sessions regarding how the misinformation has led to the forming of the Israelites group, the 5 percenters, the Nation of Islam, etc., recruiting Black men in these cults. So to Sister Jill's question, it is directly related. Because people will find a way to free themselves from oppression. And sometimes, Sister Jillian, it's imperfect, but the impulse is right, but the means sometimes is off base. What is endemic and what is consistent with humanity is that it refuses to allow itself to be oppressed perpetually. And if you will do the research, you'll see that Egypt and Cush, who are biblically brothers, we'll talk about that session too, that they had this love-hate relationship, that Egypt would come down into Cush or Nubia and oppress them. And there was one extended period of time where the Egyptians occupied the sovereign space of Cush for 500 years, made them their subjects and their slaves for 500 years. But what happened after that is that the Cushites rose up and took over and controlled and ran Egypt for hundreds of years. So humanity always finds a way to free itself. Oppression is never allowed to stand because that's God's rule. That's a divine rule. But human beings, when they feel oppressed, they will come up and express themselves in various different ways. And why they are so attractive to Black people is because there's a concept called the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If I'm feeling oppressed by Charlie and you come along and you say, Charlie is evil and Charlie is of the devil and God has blessed us and God has called us and we're the chosen ones and we're above all, that sounds good to my ears. I'm not going to unpack the theological and the historical and scientific correctness of what you're saying because I'm in my feelings. It sounds good to me. It feels better than this pain that has been inflicted upon me currently, continuously. The Black man today, I want to make this statement because it's true. I want you to look it up. Is the most imprisoned people on the face of the earth. In the history of the earth, there have not been any more people who've been in prison at the extent and at the rate as Black men in America today. So anything is better than that. And to your very good question, that's why it is so attractive to us. That's why the Nation of Islam was so attractive, because it said we can be strong. We don't need to rely on white people. God loves us. We're not cursed. Our Black skin is beautiful. Our Blackness is great. We come from champions. We have champions running through our blood. The blood of champions run through us. It may not show phenotypically, but it's there genotypically. That's a long answer. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So, but it's a good question because yes, what it is a revulsion and a reaction to this self-loathing that we've been taught. And arguably, it's still very much with us, still plaguing us today. We are still the most self-loathing people on the planet. If we're all Africans, you know why? I'm gonna say this, and I'm not trying to, you can disagree with me, but I'm giving you the broad picture. And I'm gonna say this, I'll say this. Sometimes when I'm talking and I'm not saying you got to believe me, and in fact, it's my theory, I'll say this is a Girleyism. So I've laid that foundation. Here's a Girleyism. Do you know why people of European descent like to go to Europe on vacation? Because it's their home and they've been taught to love it. You want to go to Greece, want to go to Rome. Why? Because I'm connected to that. Those are my roots. This is something that I can look to and be proud of. Do you know why many Black people don't want to go to Africa? Would never in a million years think about vacationing in Africa. Because in the words of President Trump, and I'm not trying to be political, but I think it's the white mindset here, guys. It's an S-hole continent. That's in our minds. There's nothing good in Africa. It's a dark continent. It's dark people. They're backwards. They're a developing nation. But that's why they had to excise Egypt away from Africa. Because if Egypt is Black, if Cam is actually Black, then that debunks that theory. Okay? I mean, it's something to think about. We are out of time, guys. This has been a great conversation. If I don't want to go beyond my time, I'm out of time. And I promised that we wouldn't hold you long. You guys have been very patient and I hope you've learned something. My basic promise to you is that you will learn. If you open your minds and your hearts, you don't have to agree with me, okay? Be blessed. Until next time, do the advanced reading, please.